In a courtroom where power wears tailored suits and justice too often whispers from the margins, a high-profile pharmaceutical trial takes a sharp turn when a quiet black janitor, called as a seemingly insignificant witness, shatters expectations by citing legal precedent and challenging the very lawyer who tried to belittle him, igniting a reckoning that no one in the room saw coming. If you liked the video and subscribe to the channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the defense team entered, their tailored suits sharp as scalpels. At the center of it all was Graham Ellison, the star attorney who had never lost a high-profile case. Tall, silver-haired, and dripping with charisma, he walked like he owned the air around him. Juries loved him. Judges respected him. And his opponents? They feared him. Today he represented a pharmaceutical giant accused of knowingly releasing a defective insulin product. A class action lawsuit had been filed on behalf of dozens of victims, most of them low-income and vulnerable. The plaintiff's lawyer, a young woman named Maria Alvarez, was smart but clearly outgunned. Ellison's voice cut through the hum as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, the defense is ready." Judge Ramshaw nodded. "Let's proceed." The plaintiff's case had gone on for days, witness after witness painting a picture of neglect and deceit. Now the final witness was being called. Maria stood up, nervous but determined. The plaintiffs called Mr. Darnell Hayes to the stand. There was a moment of confusion. Heads turned as an older black man in a custodial uniform stepped into the room, pushing a mop bucket. The bailiff gestured, and Darnell removed his gloves, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked slowly to the stand. Graham Ellison leaned over to his co-counsel, smirking. "What's next? The cafeteria lady?" A few chuckles rose from the defense table. Darnell was sworn in. He sat calmly, his posture neither meek nor defensive. Maria approached. "Mr. Hayes, can you please state your occupation for the record?" "I'm a janitor at Rutherford Laboratories." "And how long have you worked there?" 23 years, ma'am." A few people in the gallery raised their eyebrows. That was longer than most of the scientists and executives who had already testified. Maria continued. "Were you working the night of October 12th, when the contamination in batch 47 was discovered?" "Yes, I was on the 4th floor, just finished cleaning the lab hallways." "And did you witness anything unusual?" Graham Ellison stood. "Objection. Relevance." Maria was ready. "Your Honor, this witness was present during a critical time in the timeline. His testimony may corroborate internal reports already entered into evidence." Judge Ramshaw waved a hand. "Overruled. Proceed." Darnell nodded. "I saw Dr. Kelman leave the lab in a rush. He was on the phone, looked real shaken. About 15 minutes later, someone from compliance came in and started locking cabinets. They never do that. I stayed out the way but noticed the logbook wasn't signed." Maria looked to the jury. "Can you explain the significance of the logbook?" "It's policy. Anyone entering or leaving after hours has to sign it. It's part of FDA tracking." Ellison stood again. "Mr. Hayes, forgive me, but you're a janitor. Are you claiming to understand FDA compliance procedures?" Darnell looked at him, his expression unreadable. "I mop the floors, Mr. Ellison. But I also read." A few people in the jury exchanged glances. Ellison didn't let up. "You're aware that this is a federal court and the standards for evidence are quite high?" "I'm aware," Darnell said evenly. "Then let me be clear. You're suggesting that you, someone with no legal or scientific background, are capable of identifying procedural failures at a biomedical facility." There was a beat of silence. Darnell leaned forward. "Yes, sir. I'm also suggesting that under Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals, the court has a duty to ensure all testimony, even from a janitor, is based on sufficient facts and reliable methods." I observed both. The air changed. There was a ripple of surprise through the courtroom. Maria's eyes widened. Even Judge Ramshaw raised an eyebrow. Ellison blinked. "Come again?" "I read about Daubert when the case started. Wanted to understand what I might be walking into. I also looked up FDA Form 483 violations. That logbook missing signatures? That's a red flag. And I know red flags. I've been watching this company cut corners for years." Ellison tried to recover. "And you expect us to believe you, over the testimony of trained professionals?" Darnell didn't raise his voice. "I expect you to listen. Truth ain't got a dress code." Dead silence. A murmur started in the gallery. The jurors leaned in. Judge Ramshaw looked down at Darnell, then turned his gaze to Ellison, who for the first time in a long while, seemed unsure of his footing. Maria stepped forward again, her voice firm. No further questions. Graham Ellison hesitated. Redirect. He paused, scanning the jurors' faces. Something had shifted and he knew it. The air had changed. The room wasn't laughing anymore. No questions, Your Honor. As Darnell stepped down, a reporter in the back quietly slipped out of the room, already dialing his editor. Ellison sat alone in the courthouse cafe, his espresso growing cold. He stared out the window, jaw tight, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. A janitor, had cited Daubert. With confidence, with precision, and with the eyes of 12 jurors locked onto every word. Truth ain't got a dress code. Ellison clenched his fist. That line was already trending on social media. A reporter from the Chronicle had published a piece less than an hour after recess. The custodian who cleaned house. Janitor stuns courtroom with legal mastery. He tapped his phone again. A flurry of tweets, LinkedIn posts, and TikToks had already made Darnell Hayes into a folk hero. # the janitor held court was everywhere. The defense strategy was unraveling. His associate, Camden Reese, a junior partner fresh from Harvard Law, sat down across from him with a laptop. Media's eating it up, Camden said. We've lost the narrative. We never should have let Maria call him last, Ellison muttered. Should have objected harder. Should have known he wasn't just a floor mop with a pulse? Camden offered dryly. Ellison shot him a look sharp enough to slice. I don't lose control of a courtroom. Ever. Camden hesitated. Well, sir, respectfully, you did today. There was a tense silence between them. Camden quickly backtracked. We can pivot. Undermine his credibility in closing. Remind the jury this man has no degree, no formal training. Make it about what he isn't. Ellison rubbed his temple. The jury saw what he is, authentic, sharp, and not afraid of me. That's poison. You don't recover from that with bullet points on a slideshow. He leaned back, suddenly tired. The case had been tight. All the experts were lined up. The paper trail, while troubling, had been brushed under with clever phrasing and technical jargon. But Darnell Hayes had cut through it like a hot knife through varnish. And worse, he had shifted Ellison's image. 4 years, Ellison had commanded courtrooms with brilliance, arrogance, and a kind of patrician detachment. But now, in one viral moment, he had become the man who mocked a janitor, who underestimated someone beneath his station. Public opinion wasn't on their side anymore. Damage control, Ellison said. Get our PR team spinning hard. Push our expert witnesses out for interviews. He stopped mid-sentence as Maria Alvarez walked past the cafe window, briefcase in hand. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She looked focused, unshaken. Ellison stood abruptly. I need some air. Down on the courthouse steps, Darnell Hayes sat alone on a bench beneath a cracked stone column. His uniform was still dusted with the day's work. The badge on his chest read Senior Maintenance Technician, but everyone just called him Mr. Hayes. His phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, strangers, former colleagues from past shifts at Rutherford. He ignored them all. A soft voice broke through. That was one hell of a moment. Maria stood beside him. Darnell looked up. Didn't mean for all this to happen. Just figured the truth ought to be said loud enough for someone to hear it. She sat beside him. You didn't just speak the truth. You anchored the case. He smiled faintly. Didn't think the lawyer lady would say that to a janitor. She turned to face him. Mr. Hayes, I've seen expert witnesses fold like paper under Ellison's cross. But you didn't flinch. You didn't even blink. Darnell shrugged. Spent my life invisible. You learned to study everything around you when nobody's looking. Maria opened her briefcase and handed him a document. You mentioned FDA Form 483. I dug deeper. Turns out Rutherford got hit with one in 2019. It was buried in the archives. You were right. His expression sobered. You could have walked away from all this, she said. Why stick your neck out? Darnell's face tightened. Because my nephew took that bad batch. Diabetic since he was 10. They buried him in February. Said it was complications. But it wasn't. It was negligence. And they don't get to walk away from that just because the floor's been mopped clean. Maria nodded slowly, taking in the weight of his words. We might win this, she said. We better, he replied. Because people like Ellison? They count on folks like me never speaking up. Meanwhile, back in Rutherford Laboratories' sleek downtown tower, a boardroom buzzed with tension. The company's general counsel, PR director, and CEO sat facing a massive projection screen showing courtroom clips. Darnell's moment played again. Truth Inc. got a dress code. The CEO grimaced. This man is going to cost us $1 billion. The general counsel leaned forward. We have to settle. Quietly. Offer Maria's team a deal. If this goes to verdict, we're finished. This man could trigger a criminal inquiry. Over a janitor? No, over what the janitor exposed. The room fell silent. That night, Ellison poured himself a drink in his penthouse, the city skyline sprawling beyond the glass. He turned on the news. A panel of legal analysts dissected the trial. Today's proceedings were unlike anything we've seen, said one. A man with no formal training dismantled the defense's narrative with nothing but observation and courage. Ellison's lips curled downward. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Camden. They're preparing to offer a settlement. Company's folding. He stared at the message. His undefeated streak? Crack. But what gnawed at him most wasn't the trial. It was the janitor. The man he dismissed. The man who saw him, really saw him and wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, Graham Ellison felt doubt. Real bone-deep doubt. The morning after the courtroom debacle, Graham Ellison's corner office was uncharacteristically quiet. No interns buzzing. No call streaming in. Just silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany desk. Across from him sat Inez Garvey, his crisis consultant. A woman with ice water for blood and a reputation for saving reputations. Garvey had cleaned up scandals involving CEOs, senators, and 2 Olympic medalists. She wasn't cheap and she didn't smile. You underestimated him, she said flatly. Ellison didn't look up. I'm aware. He exposed the core weakness in your strategy, not in the facts but in the optics. You mocked a black janitor in open court. You did it with the poise of an aristocrat slapping a servant in front of a crowd. You gave the people a villain. Ellison set the pen down. And now, she continued, you need to either neutralize the janitor or reframe the narrative. Neutralize? He said, the word sour in his mouth. What does that mean? Discredit him. Shift the focus. Find anything in his past, an arrest, a debt, an inconsistency. Or better yet, frame his outburst as a premeditated stunt. You know how to sow doubt, Graham. It's what you do. Ellison exhaled, the conflict gnawing at the edges of his certainty. He's not the usual target. There's no arrogance, no angle, just clarity. Garvey tilted her head. Then muddy the water. Find something. By noon, Camden Reese had pulled every scrap of Darnell Hayes' history. Employment records, housing documents, tax filings, even Facebook posts from 2011. It wasn't much. He's clean, Camden said, frustrated. No record, not even a parking ticket. He's been with Rutherford 23 years. Same building. Same routine. He clocks in early and reads legal textbooks on his lunch breaks. Ellison arched an eyebrow. Legal textbooks? Mostly torts. ADA compliance. Pharmaceutical ethics. Anything questionable? Camden hesitated. There's one thing. In 2005, he filed a formal complaint with HR over discriminatory practices. The company never followed up and he dropped it. Ellison's eyes narrowed. Why? They claimed they investigated. The file's thin. He was accusing a supervisor of racial bias, but nothing came of it. Ellison nodded slowly. Then that's our angle. We don't attack the man, we raise questions about his history with the company. Suggest a grudge. Camden frowned. That's thin ice, sir. Painting a black man's whistleblowing as a vendetta? We're already losing the optics war. Ellison stood, voice low but firm. Then we walk the line. We don't call it bitterness. We call it bias. Just enough to make the jury wonder whether he's interpreting events through a personal lens. Once you plant that seed, you don't have to kill the tree. Just rot the roots, Camden finished. Ellison gave a small, grim smile. Exactly. That afternoon in court, the energy had changed. Maria Alvarez sensed it the moment she walked in. The defense table was confident again, measured, sharp. Ellison didn't slouch. His expression was calm, coiled. As the judge called the session to order, Ellison rose for a motion. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit supplemental context regarding witness Darnell Hayes. We believe it speaks to potential bias and previous allegations involving the defendant. Maria shot up. Objection, Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to smear a key witness. The issue he raised occurred nearly 2 decades ago and was never investigated thoroughly. Ellison's tone was syrupy smooth. We simply believe the jury deserves the full picture. Mr. Hayes has a history of conflict with the company. That context matters when evaluating the reliability of his observations. Judge Ramshaw raised an eyebrow. You're walking a fine line, Mr. Ellison. You may proceed, but I won't tolerate character assassination. Ellison nodded graciously. Understood. Maria sat, pulse racing. She'd seen this play before. Shift the spotlight, distort the lens, and watch the truth grow foggy. When the court recessed for lunch, she found Darnell seated alone again on the same bench as before. They're coming for you now, she said quietly. He looked up, calm as still water. I know. They're digging up that old HR complaint, saying you held a grudge. I did hold a grudge, he said plainly. Not for me. For all the folks who got passed over, disrespected, laughed at. You think I don't know what they're doing? They want to turn my honesty into poison. Maria knelt in front of him. We can counter. Show your records, your stability, your integrity. We can reframe it. Darnell nodded. Just tell the truth, Ms. Alvarez. Don't pretty it up. Don't spin it. Just let it stand. That evening, Ellison prepared his notes for closing arguments. He had practiced the art of ambiguity for decades, speaking the truth just sideways enough to create shadow. He stood before his mirror, reciting. Mr. Hayes is a man of principle, no doubt. But we must ask, when someone has a personal history with the company, are their memories clearer or clouded? He paused. The line tasted bitter, but he knew it would land. Just as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed again. A text from Inez Garvey. You have 1 shot left. Don't waste it trying to win the jury. Win the narrative. Ellison looked out across the city, a storm brewing in the west. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if the story he was selling still had buyers. Inside the hotel conference room turned jury deliberation chamber, 12 strangers sat behind closed doors, each carrying the weight of a trial that had turned into a national spectacle. The trial wasn't over yet. But in the jury room, lines were already forming, quiet, invisible lines drawn between facts and feelings, between credibility and skepticism. What had started as a simple liability case now hummed with moral undercurrents no one could ignore. Juror number 7, Sheila Morton. Sheila was a retired nurse, the kind of woman who color-coded her Bible and baked muffins no one asked for. She had lost a cousin to a diabetic crash 5 years ago, complication from expired insulin. She never said it aloud, but when Darnell Hayes took the stand and spoke about his nephew, she felt her chest tighten. It wasn't just testimony. It was grief with form. And she recognized it. But she was also cautious. The defense had just introduced a grain of doubt, an old HR complaint. Bias, Ellison had called it. Emotional investment. The term irked her. Since when did caring become a liability? She scribbled on her notepad. Does objectivity mean apathy? Juror number 2, Marcus Elling. Marcus was a mechanical engineer who believed in evidence, not emotion. When Hayes had quoted legal precedent, Marcus perked up, not because of the flair but because it was accurate. He checked it that night in his hotel room. But now he wasn't so sure. Ellison's suggestion, that Hayes had long-standing resentment toward the company, gave him pause. Marcus had once fired a junior colleague who held a grudge for years, waiting for an opportunity to retaliate. He didn't like to project, but he couldn't ignore patterns either. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This guy's sharp, no doubt, he muttered during a private sidebar with another juror. But even smart people can be driven by pain. And pain distorts. Juror number 12, Reena Kapoor. Reena, a sociology professor, was quietly tracking everything, not just testimony but behavior. She watched the attorney's body language, the witness's eye movement, the jury's own shifting postures. To her, Ellison had made a fatal mistake, not in the law but in the symbolism. He had mocked a man who knew more than he let on. That moved the trial out of logic and into power dynamics. And people didn't like to feel complicit in injustice. In her pocket was a worn copy of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. She'd taught a class on systemic silencing just last semester. When Darnell Hayes spoke, she felt like the curriculum had walked into the courtroom. She jotted on her legal pad, "This case isn't about insulin anymore. It's about who gets to speak with authority." During recess, the jurors returned to their separate hotel rooms, instructed not to discuss the case among themselves until deliberations officially began. Still, the silence was loud. In the lounge, juror number 4, Brian Tully, a former Marine, nodded politely at juror number 10, Denise, a middle-aged hairdresser from the Bronx. She sat curled in a chair, staring at the television as news anchors dissected the case without naming them directly. The janitor's courtroom moment continues to trend online. Many call it a turning point in the pharmaceutical case that's captured national attention. Denise scoffed. "Crazy, ain't it? The man they ignored might be the only one telling the truth." Tully looked away. "We're not supposed to talk about it." "Yeah," she said. "But we're all thinking about it." Back in the jury room the next day, they returned to observe the final witnesses. But something had changed. Juror number 8, Donovan, a young black man working 2 jobs to pay off student loans, watched Ellison with visible skepticism. Every time the lawyer glanced toward the jury, his smile felt staged. Mechanical. Empty. Donovan had been silent for most of the trial, but Darnell's testimony had jolted him. "This is what they think of us," he'd thought. "Until we hit them with something they don't expect." The others hadn't noticed it, but Donovan did. The courtroom had frozen not just because of the janitor's words, but because Ellison had flinched. A predator blinked. And once that spell broke, the whole trial looked different. Later that evening, in the private deliberation prep session with the court liaison, juror number 6 asked, "Can we request to see the transcript of Hayes' testimony?" The liaison nodded. "You may once deliberations officially begin." Several jurors looked relieved. Others, nervous. The gravity of their role settled on the room like fog. 12 people. One decision. But what decision? Was this about a faulty batch of insulin? Or about the systems that let that batch slip through? Was it about negligence? Or power? They had been told to rely only on the facts. But as one juror whispered to herself, facts don't always tell the whole truth. At that same hour, back in Ellison's office, the seasoned lawyer was polishing the final draft of his closing statement. Every syllable was engineered to shift focus. Away from Darnell. Away from humanity. Back to law. Back to doubt. But he felt it in his bones, something had shifted. The jury had seen him. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't like what they saw. The courtroom felt colder on the day of closing arguments. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass high above, but inside the room was tense, shoulders rigid, hands clenched, gazes fixed. This was the moment everything tilted. Not in numbers or data sheets, but in persuasion. Conviction. Graham Ellison stepped to the center first. He didn't wear his signature smirk. No bravado. Just a deep, solemn gravity that made the courtroom lean in. He began slowly, with the kind of cadence reserved for funerals and verdicts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a story. This is not a novel or a fable or an episode of courtroom television. This is a matter of law, of evidence, and of burden." He paced deliberately. "You've heard testimony from experts, from employees, from government records. You've seen charts, reports, compliance forms. Some of it compelling. Some of it contradictory. That's natural. But we must separate tragedy from liability, emotion from fact." He paused. "Yes, you heard from Mr. Hayes, a man who's worked hard and seen much. I do not question his sincerity. I do not question his grief. But I do question whether grief, no matter how genuine, qualifies as proof." A subtle shift from the jury box. A wrinkle of brows. Ellison noticed but pressed on. He offered memories, impressions, personal judgments. But no documents. No scientific testing. No chain of custody. Just interpretation. Ladies and gentlemen, justice is not achieved by punishing the powerful simply because they are powerful. It is achieved by holding everyone, rich or poor, janitor or CEO, to the same standard of evidence. He stepped closer to the jury. Don't let this trial become a morality play. It's not about whether you feel bad for the plaintiffs. It's about whether the plaintiffs have proven, by preponderance of the evidence, that Rutherford Laboratories knowingly caused harm. And on that measure, they have not. He nodded. Thank you. He sat down quietly. For a moment no one moved. Then Maria Alvarez stood. She didn't stride. She didn't raise her voice. She walked forward like a woman carrying something heavy and placed it gently on the floor between them all. Members of the jury, you've been asked to put aside the human pieces of this case. To strip away the grief, the voices, the faces. But the law, real law, is not divorced from the human. It was built for the human. She let that settle. The defense says Mr. Hayes offered no evidence. That he's just a janitor. But evidence isn't always a document with a stamp. It's a pattern. A missing signature in a logbook. A locked cabinet that shouldn't have been locked. A sudden visit from compliance. She pointed toward the gallery. We showed you internal emails. We showed you a Form 483 from 2019 that the company tried to hide. And who led us there? Not an executive. Not a whistleblower with a title. A man with a mop and a memory and the courage to speak. She turned to face the jury squarely. Do you think Mr. Hayes came here to spin a tale? To relive his nephew's death in front of strangers just to settle a personal grudge? Or do you believe he came here because he saw something wrong and couldn't stay silent? Maria paced once, then returned to center. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't speak like a lawyer. But he did something we don't see enough anymore. He paid attention. And that is what the defense fears. Not a janitor's bias, but a janitor's truth. She paused. Every eye was on her. This isn't just about a defective batch of insulin. It's about what happens when a company puts profits above people. When warning signs are ignored. When someone not in the room pays the price. Maria stepped back, emotion rising but contained. You don't need to be a scientist to know the truth when you see it. You just need to have the courage to say, this was wrong. And that's why we're here. She nodded gently, voice softening. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered by late afternoon. Journalists, activists, curious onlookers. Darnell Hayes remained inside, tucked in a quiet corner of the gallery. He had asked not to be on camera. He had said his piece. Now he waited. So did the world. In the jury room the door clicked shut. Deliberations had begun. The jury room was sealed tight, the outside world reduced to a murmur behind thick walls and a locked door. At the center of the long oak table sat 12 people, each with a legal pad, a pen, and a voice that now carried the weight of justice. The judge had given them their instructions. The question before them was simple in language but not in consequence. Did Rutherford Laboratories knowingly distribute a defective insulin product that caused harm? The standard, preponderance of evidence. Not certainty. Just more likely than not. The room was quiet for a long time. Then juror number 1, Marlene, a retired elementary school principal, cleared her throat. Let's just do a show of hands, she said. Initial leanings. No pressure. Just a sense of the room. Hands went up. 7 for the plaintiffs. 5 for the defense. Close. Marlene nodded. All right. Let's talk. What followed was 4 hours of tension, quiet debate, and the slow shifting of conviction. Juror number 2, Marcus the engineer, was cautious. We all like Hayes. I did too. But liking someone doesn't make their interpretation law. Juror number 12, Rena the sociology professor, replied, it wasn't just liking him. It was what he noticed. The logbook. The locked cabinets. The timestamp inconsistencies. It corroborates the internal emails. Juror number 7, Sheila the nurse, tapped her pen. You're not wrong. But what turned it for me? It was Ellison. The way he mocked Hayes. Then backed off. Like he realized he'd made a mistake. Juror number 4, Tully the former Marine, grunted. You saw it too? A quiet agreement rippled through the group. It wasn't just Darnell's words. It was how Ellison reacted, as if the mask slipped and for the first time the jury saw who he really was. The turning point came when juror number 8, Donovan, said, this whole trial has been about the wrong people talking. The experts danced around the issue. The company kept saying, we followed procedures. But Hayes? He just saw it. He saw the rot and he named it. That was when juror number 10, Denise from the Bronx, slowly raised her hand again. Then Marcus. Then all 12. Unanimous. Back in the courtroom, the audience waited in silence. Phones were tucked away. Reporters sat at the edge of their seats. The country was watching even if the cameras weren't allowed in the room. Darnell sat near the back, hat in his lap, eyes on the floor. Maria sat beside her client, barely breathing. Graham Ellison folded his hands in front of him, face unreadable, every inch the seasoned tactician waiting for a possible escape hatch. The bailiff returned. The jury has reached a verdict. Everyone stood. 12 people filed in, the weight of decision hanging off their shoulders like iron. The foreperson, Marlene, handed a folded sheet to the bailiff, who delivered it to Judge Ramshaw. He opened it, scanned it, and read aloud. In the matter of Alvarez versus Rutherford Laboratories, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiffs. A sharp intake of breath filled the room. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $72 million, and punitive damages in the amount of $250 million. Ellison flinched. It was over. He had lost. Not just the case but the story. The illusion of control. The certainty of victory. Maria bowed her head, her lips trembling. Around her, her clients embraced one another in stunned joy. Tears flowed. And shook. History had been made. But Darnell didn't move. Not at first. He sat still as if waiting for something else. Some reversal, some shadow. But it never came. Just applause. Scattered at first, then swelling. The judge banged the gavel. "This is a court of law," he said sternly. "Let's maintain order." But even he couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at his lips as he glanced toward Darnell. Outside the courthouse, the plaza erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. The crowd chanted, held signs, lifted up photographs of victims, of insulin vials, of newspaper clippings with the word guilty already stamped by public opinion. Darnell emerged slowly, flanked by Maria and a small circle of plaintiffs. His uniform was still clean but worn. The same badge on his chest. The same calm in his eyes. Microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Hayes, do you have a statement?" He paused, then nodded. "I didn't come here to win a lawsuit. I came here to tell the truth. They told me I was just a janitor. But the truth doesn't care what your title is. My nephew didn't have anyone to speak for him. So I spoke. That's all." And he stepped down past the reporters into the street. The crowd parted for him, not because he demanded it but because they wanted to follow. High above it all, in a glass tower overlooking the city, Graham Ellison stood at the window of his private office. He had spent years teaching young lawyers how to dominate a courtroom, how to exploit gaps in logic and capitalize on silence. But this time, it had been his silence that said too much. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, sharp, polished, untouchable. But today he saw a crack in it. And through that crack, a janitor's voice still echoed. The verdict was only 24 hours old, but it had already become legend. By sunrise the next morning, Darnell Hayes was on every morning news broadcast from New York to Los Angeles. His name appeared in headlines not for mopping floors, but for cleaning out a courtroom. The janitor who changed everything. Witness without a degree but with a voice. One man, one mop, one monumental verdict. They called him a symbol. A disruption. A wake-up call. But Darnell didn't feel like any of those things. He still rose at 5. Still boiled his coffee slow. Still swept his front step like he'd done for 20 years. When Maria called that morning, breathless and jubilant, he listened with quiet pride. When his neighbors left homemade pies and congratulations notes on his stoop, he thanked them one by one. But fame had never been the point. He didn't want his face in magazines. He just wanted people to listen. At the offices of Alvarez and Pierce, celebration buzzed like static. Maria stood in front of a wall of floral arrangements and thank you notes from clients she'd helped win justice. But this case felt different. It had elevated her career. And it had changed the tone of the legal world. She sat across from a journalist from The Atlantic trying to explain it. "I've worked on corporate cases before," she said. "But I've never seen a room stop breathing like it did when Darnell spoke. Not because he said something outrageous, but because he said something honest and we all realized we'd been waiting to hear it. The law has too many gatekeepers. What he did, he pushed past them." The journalist scribbled notes. "And how has this changed your approach to future cases?" Maria smiled. I'm going to stop assuming who the real experts are. Meanwhile, in the digital sphere, a cultural wildfire raged. Clips of Darnell's testimony racked up millions of views. Law schools began adding the Hayes moment to their ethics curricula. A law professor at Howard University released an op-ed titled, "When the Custodian Becomes the Constitutionalist." An advocacy group launched the Darnell Initiative, a nonprofit aimed at educating working-class communities about legal rights and court procedures. And quietly, a publisher sent a literary agent to Darnell's door. But Darnell refused most offers. He didn't want a book deal. Didn't want a movie. He agreed to one interview, PBS, no makeup, no teleprompter. Sitting across from the host in a small, unassuming studio, he wore the same blue button-up shirt from the trial. "I read somewhere," the host said, "that you used to take your lunch break sitting in the back of Rutherford's legal department, just listening." Darnell chuckled softly. "Yeah, they thought I was asleep. But I was learning." "Why?" "Because I'd seen people get talked over my whole life. And I figured if I was ever called to speak, I'd better be ready." He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. Justice doesn't live in the words of men in suits. It lives in the space between what's legal and what's right. And sometimes the only way to get there is to speak up, even if no one expects you to. The host nodded. "And what would you say to someone like you, working class, overlooked, who thinks the system isn't built for them?" Darnell paused. "I'd say they're right. It's not. But systems change when people speak. And the moment you believe your voice doesn't matter, they've already won." Far across town, in a mid-level lecture hall at Columbia Law School, Graham Ellison stood behind a podium. He was no longer the man who taught with cool arrogance. His voice had roughened. His tone had sharpened. But the name Darnell Hayes hovered over the lecture like a ghost. "Let me tell you the most dangerous thing in a courtroom," he said to his students. "It's not evidence. It's not precedent. It's the truth, when it comes from someone you didn't prepare for." He paused, then added, "If you leave this school thinking intelligence only looks one way, you will one day be proven wrong." No one dared speak. Ellison closed his folder and walked out. He had nothing else to say. Weeks passed. The lawsuit money changed lives. Survivors got relief. Families found closure. But Darnell returned to his modest home, his quiet habits, his paperbacks. He still volunteered at the community center. Still mentored his neighbor's son. But one thing had changed. People came to ask him things now. About contracts. About housing disputes. About wrongful firings. And Darnell, in his slow, deliberate way, would sit with them at his kitchen table and help them draft letters, understand forms, request hearings. He had never passed the bar. But he had passed the most important test, being heard. One Sunday morning, while sipping his coffee and watching the birds gather on the railing, Darnell pulled out a notebook. On the first page he scribbled something in thick, steady handwriting. "Justice begins when ordinary people stop asking for permission to speak." He looked at it for a long while, then turned to the next page, and began writing again. 5 years later, a bronze statue stood in the plaza outside the newly renamed Hayes Center for Civic Justice. A quiet figure in a janitor's uniform, mop in one hand, a small worn law book in the other. The inscription at its base read, "Truth ain't got a dress code." Inside the building, sunlight filtered across classrooms filled with community members, high schoolers, and second-chance students. No tuition. No entrance exams. Just a seat, a desk, and the belief that legal knowledge should belong to the people, not just the powerful. At the back of one classroom, a young man raised his hand. Did he really quote Daubert versus Merrill Dow from memory? The instructor smiled. He did. And he did it better than most first-year law students. The class laughed, but with reverence. The legend had grown over time, but the truth remained powerful. Darnell Hayes hadn't just spoken up. He had redefined what it meant to have authority. Across the country, legal aid centers saw a surge in volunteer applicants. Retired bus drivers, warehouse workers, nurses, and barbers. Many said the same thing. "I saw that janitors speak in court. I want to help people like that." Courtrooms quietly changed. Judges began allowing more time for non-traditional witnesses. Universities launched civic law programs designed for lay people. A new generation of lawyers came in quoting not just Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Thurgood Marshall, but also Darnell Hayes. In a small house on the edge of the city, The man himself was still there. Older now, a touch slower, but still sharp, still watching, still listening. He sat on the porch as the sun rose, reading letters from strangers. Some were simple thank yous. Others came from inmates, students, veterans, even law professors. He replied to every one. He didn't care about fame. He cared that someone out there was learning to speak up. One afternoon, Maria Alvarez came to visit. She had been appointed to the state appellate bench 2 years prior. The two of them sat at the table that had once been covered in legal pads and printouts. She handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked. She smiled. "A full scholarship to Lincoln Law. Evening program. Just in case you're still interested." Darnell let out a quiet chuckle. "You know I'm 72, right?" Maria shrugged. "So, you've already taught more people than most professors ever will." He opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Acceptance letter, Lincoln Law School, class of 2029. Darnell stared at it for a long time. Then slowly he smiled. 1 year later. In a modest lecture hall, with the smell of old wood and whiteboard markers in the air, a guest speaker stood behind a podium. The students didn't recognize him at first. He wore no robe, no title, just a plain blue shirt and a slow, thoughtful cadence. But once he spoke, the room fell silent. "They told me I didn't belong in court. They told me I was just a janitor. But I paid attention. I learned. I showed up. And when the time came, I spoke. Not perfectly. Not like a lawyer. But honestly, you don't need a fancy title to know what's right. You just need the courage to say it out loud. Because when you do, you'll find that truth can carry farther than anyone expects." A student raised her hand. "Mr. Hayes, do you ever wish you had done something differently?" He paused. "No," he said. "I only wish I had spoken sooner." Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.